Alright, today's lesson is on bisectors, Unit 3, Day 5. We're going to be able to identify bisectors and use a property of bisectors to determine the value of variables and angle measures. So, let's take a look at the word bisector. A bisector splits an angle or segment into two congruent parts. And we talked about before how congruent means equal, or two exact same parts. An angle bisector is specifically a ray that divides an angle into two congruent angles. So if we start with angle ABC, which is this large obtuse angle here, and we have ray BD, that is a bisector. A bisector is going to cut our angle into two equal parts. So we know that that angle, ABD, is congruent or the same as angle DBC. So if I told you that this angle here was 50 degrees, then I know that this angle would also be 50 degrees. They would be equal or congruent. Now there's two different equation stems that we use when we talk about these different types of angles. When they are congruent, when we have information that they are going to be the same, then we can use the first one. So the first equation stem is really helpful for when we have vertical angles, which look kind of like an X, and they're the opposite angles. We talked about how those are congruent. This equation stem is also really helpful for when we have bisectors, because we talk about angles that are congruent, right? We know that those angles are going to be the same. Equation 2 is really useful for when we have complementary, which is 90 degrees, and supplementary angles. And supplementary is when we have angles that add up to 180 degrees. So let's take a look at this first teacher example. It says, given ray AB bisects angle CAD, determine the value of x. So here we're given this ray AB that is a bisector of angle CAD. Because it's a bisector, we know that the two angles created are congruent. That means we can use our first equation stem. This equals this. So here we fill in 33 equals 4x plus 1. All we have to do now is solve this equation. We can solve it by subtracting 1 from both sides. 32 equals 4x. Divide by 4, and x is equal to 8. And here it asks for the value of x, so this is our final answer. Be careful, because sometimes it'll ask for an angle measure. When it asks for the angle measure of a specific angle, then you have to plug it back in. Try student example number 1. All right, so our second teacher example, it looks a little bit more complicated, but we know what all this information means. It says AOC and COB are supplementary angles. So this word supplementary means it equals 180 degrees. Let's take a look. AOC here is going to be AOC here. And then COB is going to be COB. Right? And those two angles are going to equal 180 degrees. It also says that OD bisects AOC. So OD is our bisector of AOC, which means this angle is congruent to this angle. So that's what this one is doing. And then lastly, we know OC bisects COB. So, I think that should be an E. OE bisects COB. So we know that this angle here is congruent to this angle. So if we're told that AOD is 4x plus 2, then we also know the other angle is congruent, so it's also 4x plus 2. we know that EOB is 3x plus 4, and that COE is congruent. It will also be 3x plus 4. So we used a property of bisectors to identify that AOD and DOC will both be 4x plus 2, and the property of bisectors to know that COE and EOB are both 3x plus 4. And we were told from the very beginning that these two larger angles, AOC and COB, are supplementary, or equal to 180, which means all of these individual angles are going to add up to 180 degrees. So I'm going to plug in 4x plus 2 plus 4x plus 2 plus 3x plus 4 plus 3x plus 4. And now I'm just combining all of my like terms. So I have 4x, 4x, 3x, 3x. So when I add them all together, I think I get 14x. And then 2 plus 2 plus 4 plus 4 is going to be 12. Okay? And then when I solve, I'm going to subtract 12 from both sides. 68. And then divide by 14. I think it's going to be times 12. 8. There we go. So we know that x is going to equal 12. And that answers our first question. Solve for x. It says then determine the angle measure of AOC. So you know that AOC is going to be this larger or blue angle there. In order to figure out what that is going to equal, we need to plug in our x value. So we know it's going to be 4x plus 2 plus 4x plus 2. Everywhere we see a 4, I'm going to plug in 12. It's going to be 48 plus 2 plus 48 plus 2, which will equal 100 degrees. So angle AOC equals 100 degrees. Okay. Try student example number 2 on your own. And don't forget to do your reflection.